The footage is brutal. A government official beaten to death outside a district office. Protesters shouting, fists raised, demanding justice. Down with the CCP! Echoes through the streets of Guangdong. But this isn't just another protest. This is something darker and deadlier. In one of China's largest industrial zones, workers are sleeping on factory floors with no wages, no orders, no way out. Warehouses packed with unsold goods. Shipments frozen at ports. The so-called world's factory has become a powder keg. And here's the question nobody wants to ask. What happens when a nation built on cheap labor can't pay its own people anymore? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the real cost of this trade war. Not for governments, but for the workers trapped inside a collapsing system. The factories are going dark. Production lines, once buzzing 24 hours a day, now sit frozen, silent, lifeless, in Guangdong, in Zhejiang, across the heart of China's export machine, the same machine that fueled the so-called economic miracle. One by one, factories are closing their doors, some overnight, some without warning. The orders from America gone. In just 3 weeks after Trump's 145% tariffs took effect, container bookings from China to the US collapsed by more than 60%. That's not a slowdown. That's not a dip. That is the sound of an economy slamming into a brick wall. Lao Wang, a factory owner in Zhejiang, used to ship 300,000 pet cages a year to the US. This year, his orders were canceled. His goods stacked high in the warehouse, no buyers, no way out. $4 million in losses. And his workers, unpaid, angry, desperate. They didn't just lose a job. They lost their lifeline. This is not one factory's story. This is the snapshot of an entire sector collapsing. The port of Los Angeles, the main gateway for Chinese exports, reported a 1/3 drop in arrivals. 20 scheduled ships skipped docking in May alone. 250,000 containers left floating, undelivered. And behind every one of those empty containers, there's a worker back in China, waiting, hoping, getting nothing. From the assembly lines of Dongguan to the shipping yards of Shenzhen, the message is the same. There's no work. Cathay Pacific's cargo division reports air freight demand from China to the US down 30%. Hapag-Lloyd canceled 30% of their China-bound bookings. Logistics chains, frozen. Warehouses, overflowing. Retail shelves abroad, untouched by Chinese goods. The chain reaction is brutal. Container orders down 45%. Air freight slashed in half. Inventory piling up, choking cash flow, forcing factories to shut down. And the workers, left with nothing but back pay owed and a boss who quietly disappears into the night. The desperation has turned to anger. Videos leak from the industrial zones. Crowds of laid-off workers gathering outside shuttered plants, demanding their wages. Yelling, throwing bricks at the factory gates. Facing off against riot police. In one footage smuggled out of Guangdong, a woman screams at a factory manager, "You owe us! How are our children supposed to eat?" The fear is spreading faster than the news itself. When the government censors the footage, people share the stories in whispers. On WeChat, in factory dormitories, in the streets. You heard about the fight in Zhejiang? They're saying 3 people died in a protest last week. Is it true? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain. Fear breeds anger, and anger breeds revolt. In the middle of all this, Beijing keeps the same face. Everything is stable, they say. The economy is resilient, but the workers know better. No work, no wages, no future. This is not just an economic slowdown. This is the first domino in a collapse that Beijing cannot control. And the fuse was lit the moment those tariffs hit. Because the truth is, China's export machine was never built to withstand this kind of blow. It was always too dependent on the American market. Now that market is closing the door. And behind that door, millions of Chinese workers trapped. No way out. The riots? They're just the beginning. There's a saying inside the export hubs of southern China. You can stop the machines, but you can't stop the debt. Because even when the orders vanish, the bills keep coming. rent for the warehouses, wages owed to the workers, raw material payments due last month, power bills stacking up, even though the lights are out. Factories can't just close and walk away. Their production lines were never designed to pivot. These aren't flexible operations. They were built for one thing: high-volume, low-margin exports. And they were built around one customer, the United States. Trump knew this. The 145% tariff wasn't random. It was targeted, straight at the pressure point, straight at the chokehold of China's economic engine. 80% of the output from these coastal factories was destined for American shelves. Walmart, Home Depot, Amazon, the pet cages, the smart speakers, the plastic Christmas ornaments. Now, the ships are empty, the shelves are bare, and the workers are trapped. Because here's the ugly truth about how China's supply chain works. You can't just reroute. The equipment, the molds, the sourcing contracts, they're all locked in place, designed specifically for the American order book. You can't just pick up those machines and start making parts for Europe or the Middle East overnight. The specs don't match. The buyers aren't there. Even the so-called Plan B, shifting exports through Vietnam, India, or Mexico, is failing. Why? Because America isn't stupid. The new tariffs didn't just hit goods labeled "Made in China." They came with strict origin rules, tighter customs inspections, and aggressive crackdowns on transshipment games. Round-tripping through third countries, blocked, faking certificates of origin, audited and seized. Every loophole Beijing thought it could exploit is getting locked down. One by one, quietly, strategically, behind closed doors. And as those doors slam shut, the factories keep bleeding. Hapag-Lloyd's cancellation rate, 30% of outbound orders gone. Sea Intelligence reports bookings down nearly 400,000 containers in just 4 weeks. A staggering 25% drop on Asia-North America routes. Inside the warehouse districts of Shenzhen, factory owners whisper the same grim math. If we stop shipping for 2 months, we go bankrupt. And for thousands of these small and mid-sized manufacturers, the 2-month mark has already passed. In desperation, some factories are offloading inventory at a loss, selling at below cost just to pay the electricity bill. Others are turning to gray market deals, trying to move unsold goods through Canada or Southeast Asia. But none of it is working fast enough. The cash flow is gone. The wage arrears are piling up, and the workers are reaching a breaking point. One labor rights group leaked an internal police memo from Zhejiang. High risk of collective incidents in the export zones. Monitor worker dormitories. Increase security presence at key manufacturing parks. Collective incidents. That's the government's language for riots. They know what's coming, but they can't stop it. Because the longer these factories stay locked into a broken system, a system that no longer feeds them, the more that desperation turns into rage. And that rage has only one place to go. Not toward the Americans, not toward Trump, but toward the local bosses, toward the Communist Party officials who promised stability, who bragged about the resilient economy, while the paychecks stopped coming. The same workers who once packed iPhones and speakers and Christmas lights for the American market are now standing outside factory gates with signs that read, "We want our wages. We want our future." This is the crack in the wall. Because when millions of workers realize they're locked in a system that will never pay them back, the system itself begins to shake. And in Beijing, they see the tremors, but they still pretend nothing's wrong. How long can they keep the lie alive? The cracks are no longer hidden. They run straight through the heart of China's so-called economic miracle. From the factory floors of Dongguan to the dusty streets outside Canton Fair, the world is watching the collapse happen in real time. But inside China, the people are told, everything is fine. State media repeats the same line. The economy remains strong. Foreign demand is stable. The supply chain is unshaken. But step inside the industrial parks, and you hear a very different story. In Ningbo, one textile plant quietly laid off half its workforce last month. No severance. No explanation. Just a notice pinned to the dormitory doors. Operations suspended indefinitely. In Shenzhen, Truck drivers line up outside the warehouses, waiting for shipments that never come. Some sleep in their cabs. Some haven't been paid in weeks. And in Guangzhou, a freight forwarder leaked a voice recording to overseas media. Bookings are down 45%. Our containers are stuck. No orders. The ships aren't coming. This isn't just about one sector. This is the engine room of China's economy. And the engine is seizing up. You can feel it in the numbers. The so-called urban survey unemployment rate sits at 5.3%. But even Beijing's own economists know the real number is higher, much higher. Small and mid-sized businesses in Guangdong and Zhejiang report bankruptcy rates as high as 30%. Foreign direct investment, down 19.9% year-on-year, the lowest level in decades. The math is simple. No exports, no orders, no cash flow. And without cash flow, no payroll. Factories were never built to survive a freeze like this. Their business model depends on constant motion. High volume, low margin, always moving, always shipping, but the conveyor belt has stopped. Some factory owners are calling it the slow death. Others aren't so patient. In Jiangsu, one electronics manufacturer skipped town overnight, left hundreds of workers unpaid. A few weeks later, video leaked of angry employees flipping company trucks and smashing windows. The police showed up fast, but they didn't fix the problem. They just pushed the anger underground. You can feel that anger building. On the streets, in the dormitories, in the half-empty cafeterias where workers sit in silence, scrolling through their phones, watching for any sign of work returning. But the work isn't coming back. Trump's tariff wall wasn't just a tax on goods. It was a lock on the exit door. The workers understand this, even if they're not allowed to say it out loud. One factory manager, speaking off record, admitted to a local journalist, "We tried to move orders through Vietnam. Customs flagged the shipments. Everything was held up. The buyers walked away. So the factories wait. And the workers wait. And the fear keeps spreading. Because waiting means burning through savings. Watching the rent notices stack up. Watching the food budget shrink. Watching your roommates pack up and leave because there's no point in staying. And when there's no work, when there's no way out, frustration becomes fuel." One labor rights group in Hong Kong has been tracking worker protests since the tariffs began. They report a sharp increase in collective actions across southern China, especially in the export zones. Factory sit-ins, road blockades, clashes with security guards, more incidents every week. It's not on the news. You won't see it on CCTV, but the videos still leak. A man holding up a sign outside a shuttered plant. "We built your profits. Now pay what you owe." A woman screaming into a police barricade. "We made your products. We gave you our youth. You give us nothing." Behind the slogans, the message is clear. The machine is breaking, and the people inside that machine know exactly who locked the doors. The bosses? Gone. The government? Silent. The system? Still lying. But the cracks are there. Deep, wide, growing by the day. And the question hanging in the air, in every dorm room, in every empty warehouse, in every factory district from Shenzhen to Ningbo, is simple. How much longer before the whole thing breaks wide open? It starts with one factory, one closure, one unpaid payroll, one group of workers locked out of the gates. But it doesn't stop there, because when one factory falls, it pulls down suppliers with it. The plastic parts manufacturer, the cardboard box supplier, the trucking company hired to move the goods. The shutdown spreads. Like dominoes, one electronics plant in Dongguan collapses. The 5 smaller parts factories upstream collapse with it. The ripple hits the raw material vendors, the freight forwarders, the shipping companies, and then it hits the workers. 6 million jobs gone. Maybe more. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences warned years ago, a 10% drop in exports could mean 5 million jobs lost. But these numbers are no longer theoretical. They're visible on the streets. In Shenzhen, hundreds of workers gather outside Labor Bureau offices, begging for arbitration over unpaid wages. In Guangzhou, crowds line up at unemployment centers, but the offices have no jobs to offer. Across the Pearl River Delta, the labor market has collapsed. Young graduates, once promised the dream of stable factory work, now roam the streets with empty resumes. The lucky ones find gig work, food delivery, ride-hailing, warehouse day labor. The unlucky ones? They go home, back to rural villages, back to families who can barely support themselves. This is the domino effect in real time. A logistics manager in Ningbo summed it up in one sentence. The whole chain is frozen, and when the supply chain freezes, so does hope. The frustration boils beneath the surface, but it doesn't stay hidden for long. Inside factory dormitories, workers pass around videos of protests. In Zhejiang, hundreds of laid-off employees sit outside the shuttered gate of an LED factory, holding banners, chanting for unpaid wages. Police arrive. They always do. But there's only so much force can cover when the anger is this big and this justified. In Dongguan, a group of ex-factory workers blocked a key highway for 5 hours, demanding back pay. When the riot squads moved in, several protesters were beaten. Videos of the crackdown leaked through VPN channels, spreading across worker chat groups in minutes. The censors scramble to delete the footage, but the message is already out. This isn't just a handful of angry workers. This is a powder keg, and Beijing knows it. That's why, according to leaked local government reports, there has been a sharp increase in internal stability maintenance budgets across export-heavy regions. More police patrols, more surveillance, more monitoring of factory zones and labor groups. But security can't solve the core problem, because the problem isn't protesters. The problem is broken promises. Promises of steady work, promises of wages paid on time, promises of a growing economy that would lift all boats. Instead, the boats are sinking, and the people watching them sink are getting angrier. Truck drivers are demanding contract renegotiations as freight volume plummets. Warehouse owners are refusing to store unsold inventory unless deposits are paid up front. Suppliers are walking away from unpaid invoices, knowing they'll never collect. This isn't just an economic slowdown. This is a collapse in trust. The workers no longer believe the bosses. The bosses no longer believe the government. And the government, still clinging to the same script. Stable, resilient, strong. But the cracks are showing. A labor researcher in Hong Kong leaked internal data from a major shipping company. Order volume is down more than 40%. Peak season never came. Workers are being let go quietly to avoid headlines. Quiet layoffs, quiet closures, quiet desperation. But the anger doesn't stay quiet. It spreads. Word of mouth. Phone to phone. Dorm to dorm. A laid-off worker in Shenzhen told a reporter, off the record, "They say we're not allowed to gather. But what else can we do? Sit here and starve." This is what happens when the supply chain stops moving. The chain reaction doesn't just stay inside the warehouses. It moves out into the streets. One factory falls, then another, and another. Each closure leaves behind unpaid wages, broken families, and angry workers. Domino after domino. And the line of dominoes? It leads straight to Beijing. Because the system that built its strength on exports just lost its biggest customer. And the people inside that system? They're not waiting quietly. The workers aren't the only ones walking away. So is the money. Foreign direct investment into China has dropped nearly 20% year-on-year, the lowest point in modern history. And it's not just small investors pulling out. It's the giants, the multinationals, the funds that once bet big on the China story. Because the story has changed. What was once sold as the world's most reliable manufacturing hub is now a battlefield of uncertainty. Factories shutting down, protests growing, export numbers crashing, and a government too proud to admit the bleeding. In boardrooms from New York to Frankfurt, the conversation has shifted. The question is no longer, how much should we invest in China? The question now is, how fast can we move out? Apple is moving supply chains to India. Nike and Adidas are ramping up operations in Vietnam. Even the giants of luxury, once deeply tied to Chinese manufacturing, are rethinking their sourcing strategies. Because the risk is no longer just about tariffs. It's about instability. It's about a supply chain trap. One executive from a major U.S. investment firm, speaking off the record to Bloomberg, put it bluntly, "We can't keep betting on a country where the government denies reality while the factories are on fire." They're not alone. Data from Sea Intelligence shows a sustained 25% drop in container bookings on Asia-North America routes. Hapag-Lloyd canceled nearly one-third of its China export business. And the air freight market remains frozen, demand down 30%. The logistics freeze is just the surface. The deeper problem is confidence. Investors are watching the protests, watching the unpaid workers, watching the warehouses fill up with unsold goods. And they're asking the only question that matters: is this system still stable? Beijing keeps saying yes, but Wall Street is voting no. Vanguard, BlackRock, Fidelity, quietly trimming their China exposure, moving capital into Southeast Asia, India, and Latin America, following the flow of manufacturing, following the flow of goods. Because business doesn't care about slogans, cares about risk. And right now, China looks risky. The foreign factories still operating in China are hedging their bets, diversifying supply chains, building contingency plans, planning exit routes just in case. A logistics manager at one major European electronics firm leaked to Reuters, "We were told to start dual sourcing outside of China by the end of Q2. Not negotiable. This isn't politics. This is business. And business hates uncertainty." When workers are rioting outside the factory gates, when shipments are stuck in customs, when the government refuses to acknowledge the problem, capital moves elsewhere. The global investment exodus isn't making headlines yet, but the numbers tell the story. Vietnam's exports to the US surged 25% last year. India's share of global smartphone assembly continues to climb. Mexico's border factories are seeing record growth. The world is adapting, but Beijing is still pretending, still claiming that the export engine is fine, still denying that the riots are happening, still hiding behind the same press releases about resilience. But money doesn't wait for spin. It follows the data, and the data is clear. Container bookings down, air freight collapsing, warehouses full, workers unpaid, protests spreading. And behind the scenes, the investors are making their choice. One fund manager in Singapore told the Financial Times, "China is no longer Plan A. It's Plan C, if we have no other options." The message is brutal, but it's honest. For decades, China was the center of the world's supply chain, the safe bet, the default choice. Now, it's the question mark. And in the high-stakes world of global capital, question marks don't get funding. They get cut off. Because no one wants to be trapped inside a collapsing system. Not the workers, not the investors, not the global brands. And as Wall Street walks away, Beijing is left clinging to the only strategy it has left: denial. But denial doesn't pay the bills. And denial won't stop the exodus. The smart money is already gone. The only question now is who's next. The machines have stopped. The factories stand silent. The workers are rioting. The investors are leaving. And Beijing, still pretending nothing is wrong. They call it resilience. But what the world sees is collapse. What the workers feel is betrayal. This isn't just an export crisis. It's the unraveling of a system built on denial, built on debt, built on dependence. The supply chain trap has closed. The exit doors are locked. And the people inside? They're the ones paying the price. The question now is not if the collapse will spread, but how far it will go. How long can Beijing keep the lid on the anger boiling across its own streets? And when the next domino falls, will anyone still believe the lie?